Well, good morning. I'm John Casper with the Oshkosh Chamber, and we're calling to order our third part of our three-part series. That's kind of redundant, isn't it? On municipal budgets and local and school district budgets. We had Mark Roloff a couple weeks ago do the Oshkosh City. Mark Harris did the Winnebago County board budget, and this week we have Vickie Cartwright along with Drew Ninehouse with the Oshkosh Area School District is going to talk about the Oshkosh School District's budget in terms of what has happened, what's moving forward. We're all under the, seems to be a common theme in all these discussions is impact of COVID-19 on budgets, on operations, and that sort of thing. So we will be throwing it over to Vickie and Drew soon. We are recording this session, so if anybody wants to go back later and view it or share it with others, you can do it. It'll be on our website. The way we'll do it, we'll have Vickie and Drew go through their talking points, and then we will, if at any time, just use the icons on or the links on the bottom for questions. Click on that, provide a question, and we will address those at the end of the program. So. With that, Vickie Cartwright, our superintendent of Oshkosh Area Public Schools, is with us, and she will take it from here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Casper. I greatly appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. So, there's been a lot of conversation and a lot of questions related to COVID-19 and how does that impact the school district budget. So we wanted to go ahead and have an opportunity this morning in order to answer some of those questions that may be looming in your head out there and address some of those things of what may be misconceptions and misperceptions related to this. And so we have with us this morning Drew Ninehouse, who is our our executive director for business services. And we prepared just a brief presentation in order to hit some of those most common areas that we know that there are questions out there about, and then also be able to answer any other questions that you may have related to that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Ninehouse.
Dr. Cartwright. Good morning, everyone. So we were asked to do a presentation on the budgets, last year's and this year's, and then kind of focused around the impact of COVID and what it's done. So if you look at what our expenses and our revenues were, this is for last year, the last fiscal year that ended June 30th. So you can see that our expenditures actually we're higher than what we have budgeted by a little bit more than 1.5 million. But our revenues also exceeded what we were budgeted by about 1.5 million. So one of the things to remember in this or look at in this is the expenses, the way DPI does expenses, that actually includes our transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 46, because Fund 46 is a capital improvements fund that gets segregated and can only be used for what we have on file with DPI on a 10-year improvement plan for capital needs. So we did transfer 2.5 million this year into Fund 46, so that is included in the expenses. So that typically would not have happened. So it is kind of inflating our expenses a little bit, but the good thing on that is we are aided by the state based on expenses. So we capture $384,000 in state aid by transferring that 2.5 million to Fund 46 rather than not getting any aid at all and leaving it in what would be a fund balance situation. So that was kind of the rationale with putting it into Fund 46, and then it helps us offset some of the known expenditures we'll have within our deferred maintenance plan that we can access that money for. We still did end up with the surplus of right around that $400,000 mark, which is also good because right now our fund balance is running a little low comparatively to districts our size. And that is one of the things that came up when we refinanced our debt this past about 2 months ago. The credit agent was a little concerned that as we increase our debt load, if the referendums pass in November, as we increase that debt load, that our fund balance is going to be significantly lower than what would be expected. So that is an area that we are going to have to look at over the next short term, 3 to 5 years, is continuing to build our fund balance up. Again, one of the talking points off of that is I was able to have the conversation with them that the Fund 46 balance is also can be joined in with the fund balance within those discussions. As we've been adding into our post-employment benefit fund, the OPEB Fund 73, which is also just deferring what we would be putting into fund balance as well. So here's kind of a breakdown by object, and kind of give you an idea of what the impact on COVID had. So we're able to save between salaries and benefits overall, lumping those together, we were able to save about 1.4 million. But unfortunately, you can see we actually increased our purchase services by more than that. And then our non-capital objects, which for a large part is computer software that we needed to be able to quickly move into a virtual education system. We had to really beef up the licensing we have for the computer software. And again, that's quite a large chunk of that. So a lot of our additional expenses there in the 300s and the 400s was due to trying to really make that quick pivot into virtual learning. Again, we've been very fortunate in our district that the past operational referendums was able to really put us in a situation where we didn't have a lot of technology needs as far as the hardware goes. We were pretty well as a district funded in those. It was just some of the one-off things that happened with a virtual system that needed to happen. And again, the transfer to other funds, a lot of that increase was actually due to the increasing from what was budgeted to what was actual in the Fund 46 and capturing that extra aid. So then you'll see the revenues. Our revenues were obviously a lot more stable than what our expenditures are. We did have a shortfall within our local sources, and most of that is taxes still owed because we were able to defer some of the property taxes. They were given a little bit longer time to make those payments. That's why those were a little short at the time. Some of the others increases, we had increases within open enrollment, and we did get additional funding from the state that came through that was not planned within our budgeting. The other financial sources, the 800s, that's actually selling a property. So that was really a one-time, most of these are one-time situations that aren't going to be recurring and be able to be planned for the next budget year. So our current budget concerns, we really don't know what's happening with the state. So because of that, we didn't give a CPI increase to staff. We did do lane movement and step movement within the different salary matrices that we have with our different categories of employees. But at this time, still with the uncertainties at the state, we're not comfortable giving a CPI increase overall to the staff. While talk has kind of died down a little bit at the state as their financial picture gets a little clearer as we've gotten into this, there still is conversation out there, even if it's a little quieter than it was 2 months ago, that after the election, there could be a correction happening in Madison, even for this school year. So we're still playing it cautiously, and we want to wait to make any decisions on this that would be an ongoing expense really vet that out and make sure that we're not going to have a surprise for this year. There's also quite a bit of uncertainty going on still as how long we're going to be going through the different education models. Right now, we're obviously, as many of you know, in Model 4, so we're in virtual learning. But right now, we don't know how long that's going to last. It's largely dependent on what the COVID numbers we're receiving from the county on a weekly basis. We're using that data and some other data to help guide us within that decision making. So we've still got quite a bit of uncertainties there. So we're trying to be as conservative as we can now, to not potentially put us in a situation where we have to make a large correction in a few months.
And we also want to make sure that we affirm to our community members, as well as our business community members, our goal remains and has been and continues to be to provide as much in-person or face-to-face instruction as possible in that safe environment, and where we can not only is it in a safe environment, but also to where we can appropriately staff our schools in order to provide that safe environment. So just wanted to emphasize that once again. That is our goal. Quite frankly, we prefer having our students in front of us. It's more difficult when you're in a virtual world. And so again, very appreciative of the understanding of that and the collaboration that we have at this point in time while we are in the state for which we are related to COVID. Mr. Mihans.
Thank you for that. And really the desire from the district to have students in the buildings, not only is that an educational perspective, it's also from the financial perspective from the business office as well, because a significant amount of money is being lost in our food service because we aren't being able to serve as many meals as normal, which ends up obviously having an impact on that program, and any shortfall we have within the food service program has to be covered by Fund 10, which is our normal operating budget. So we did have a deficit that was caused by COVID at the end of last year. We had a pretty good surplus going for the year before March hit. So we were about $100,000 ahead but when March and COVID hit, and we ended up with just about a $300,000 loss due to COVID in the 3 months. So even though we were going out and we had 9 different sites that we had people able to pick food up, and the food was part of the summer food program now, so everyone got it free, participation still didn't keep up with what our expenses are in this program. And so we lost a significant amount of money in that 3 months, 4-month period. So the longer we're in a virtual environment, the more stress it puts on that department specifically, which then again puts pressure on our normal operating budget, because our operating budget has to cover any shortfalls here. So it's an additional way that we really need students in-house as much as we can get them.
So just to summarize exactly what Mr. Meehan is stating is that the amount of reimbursement that we receive, as well as the amount of costs that are associated in order to provide food, of which we are required to do, just so that people are aware of that as well, even in a virtual environment. What ends up happening is, if the more participation we have within the program, the more likely we are able to purchase our food in a different manner, which is more cost effective than we have the situation of low demand. When we have low demand, then our ability to take advantage of cost savings efforts, unfortunately, is not productive, and ultimately cost the food service program additional dollars as a result of that. So hence our efforts, even in the virtual environment right now, of really reaching out to our families as much as possible and saying, please participate, it's free to you, because on the back end, it allows us to take advantage of those cost saving benefits. bulk buying, those kind of things, so that our reimbursement from the federal government comes in and balances that budget. Mr. Nehans, did I miss anything on that?
No, that was good. Thank you. Another concern we've had with this year's, moving into this year's budget that happened in July 1 and trying to prepare school and our buildings for the potential to be able to shift quickly between the different learning models is our need to purchase equipment and supplies, not knowing where all that money is coming from. And a lot of times with the federal programs, many of you may know, you don't get the quickest response, or sometimes they'll start a program and say it'll last as long as funding lasts, and then you end up, they shut the funding off much earlier than what you were anticipating. So that's having a fairly major stress as well. And I got a slide coming up in the here in the presentation that'll kind of address some very specific costs within the COVID related and where our CARES Act money is, and to illustrate this point for you. Another major concern for the budget this year and also in the next 3 to 5 years is we have aging facilities, and they cost a lot of money to put Band-Aids on or to repair and fix. So that's always a fairly good stressor on a budget when you're dealing with as many buildings as we have and as many repairs that are not only anticipated, but the one-offs that we had something that's now an emergency. So that's always a fairly good budget concern. Some of the other concerns we have are due to COVID, we've really shrunk the sub pool. We used to have well over 200 subs at our disposal, which still wasn't quite enough, but a fairly substantial amount. And now we're down to double digits, if that. So we're really being stressed, and where that really becomes a budget concern is while we're saving some money from what the budget line would be for subs, we've had to drastically increase what we pay outside of contract for the teachers who are now doing overloads or additional work that wouldn't typically have been done within their contract. And that amount is costing us more than what it would to have a normal sub pool. So that's another one of our concerns there within that area of what that's doing to us.
And Mr. Nehans, I also want to point out it's not due to a lack of creative thinking or doing things differently. In order to fill our sub pool, we've actually have done a lot of creative things in order to address this need. In our substitute teacher pool right now, for majority, the rationale or the reason behind why there's such a drop, as a majority of our substitute teacher pool, just as any district across the state, is usually comprised of individuals who've already retired. Given the COVID situation as it is right now, those individuals are in place and they are in that higher risk category, as well as they previously are retired, so they have other income sources oftentimes. So they have the ability to choose whether they want to substitute or not substitute. We've done creative things, for example, with UWO, reaching out to them for their students who have associate's degrees in order to say, okay, reach out to those students who would be available. We'll pay for their training in order for them to be certified as substitute teachers in order to increase our substitute teacher pool. In addition to that, while we were in person in our hybrid, our Model 3, what was happening is, unfortunately, we had a lot of staff members who were exposed through community spread most often, which became that staffing issue that I was talking about earlier. It wasn't that we were leaving schools on their own in order to solve those problems. We would have teachers from other schools come over to fill in as substitute teachers. These may be resource teachers. We had administrators going into classrooms in order to cover those classrooms. It just unfortunately got to the point to where we were not able to appropriately staff our schools. And as you can hear, we're even taking a look at our current paraprofessional staff. And where places where we can potentially look to have them, pull them if needed in order to become substitute teachers once we resume back into hybrid 3, our model 3 hybrid mode. So I just wanted to emphasize that again. It's not a matter of us trying to continue to do what we've always done in the past. It truly was an effort and continues to be an effort in which to get additional people within our substitute pool.
Hey, Vickie, if I could just jump in with a real quick question that came in. How many, on an average day, how many subs does the Oshkosh School District need to, I mean, where there's, you know, no teacher available? I mean, I'm talking, what number on average?
Let me get that number to you here in just a couple of minutes, John.
All right.
So another thing that's going to impact us, and not only, it's not a this budget year concern, it's for me, it's the next year. We have a hold harmless ability within the state to make us whole when we have reductions in enrollment. Our reductions this year were a little bit out of the norm because we have a larger group of students than normal that are trying to seek different education, whether it's homeschooling or they want face-to-face completely and they want to know that, or they don't want any face-to-face and they want to completely be virtual. So right now, that's going to back off. What happens is the second year when the hold harmless goes away, it backs off our revenue limit authority. So we're going to lose $920,000 from our overall revenue limit authority beginning next year because of this year's reductions, unless something happens at the state and they give a waiver off of all of that. Being a different year in a COVID environment, some are arguing that it's not really fair to hold declining enrollments on districts when this isn't a typical year. So that is going to have an impact on next year's and future years because it is going to reduce our revenue limit authority. Obviously, we've got staffing concerns. This is what could be expected. Our retirements are going up as staff that are a little bit older or don't want to be in a virtual environment are leaving, and young staff are leaving the field a little bit quicker now as well. Also, the additional technology that we've been able to purchase and utilize, but that also comes with impacts on the future budgets on replacing those, keeping those on schedule, and making sure that we have ability to maintain those. So it's great that we're able to do it, but it does put a little bit of a pinch on upcoming budgets as far as keeping those in a rotation.
And just a little bit of a clarification related to staff members who are retiring. It's not necessarily due to us being in a virtual environment. It is, we're finding that a majority of the rationale behind that is because they have the ability to be able to go ahead and retire. And they're within a higher risk group oftentimes and do not wish to continue providing instruction in an environment that could potentially be a risky situation for them.
So what you're looking at here on this screen is specific expenses that a typical taxpayer, I would think, would think, okay, this should be under our CARES Act. We received just under 1.4 million for our allocation of the CARES Act. So far, we've spent a little over $2 million just this year on that. We were lucky enough that we saw some surpluses as we went over earlier for last year. So I was able to absorb within last year's budget a lot of expenses that could have been included in this. that we're able to just say, let's put them off on last year because we still had a surplus. Knowing that we weren't going to have enough CARES allocation to cover both years, and I wanted to cover this year's expenses as much as I could. So you can see, looking at that list, we're already almost $750,000 over what we got for CARES money from the government. And that custodial supply, that was from July until September. So that dollar amount is only going to increase as we continue to have to purchase additional disinfectants and other supplies that are coming in, PPE supplies that are coming in. So this has drastically increased what our expenditures are, and really none of these, very few of them actually have to do with actual operations as far as a normal school year. So this is all money that we're hoping. We obviously are going to have some savings in certain areas, but this is a lot of money additional that we need to come up with savings in other aspects of our normal budget.
And for clarification, because we also are aware that individuals are under the notion that though we were in virtual learning, that our school, similar to what had happened this past spring, our school buildings are closed. That is not the case. In fact, we're still offering a lot of face-to-face instruction, and therefore subgroups for which we're required to provide instruction, as well as those for which we know it's best practice to provide instruction. So students who have significant disabilities, we're continuing to offer in-person instruction for those individuals. And for individuals who have no English language acquisition at this point in time, we're continuing to provide face-to-face instruction for those individuals. For students who are struggling and need additional assistance, tutoring, we're also providing we're also providing for them upon appointment, the face-to-face instruction. Many of our teachers continue to come to the schools in order to teach from their classrooms. So in order to try to provide as much normalcy as possible when they're in those live sessions or even the recorded sessions for our students and families. To answer John Casper's question earlier as to, well, how many substitutes do you normally need on any given day? Dependent upon the time of year, it will range anywhere between 50 to 80 substitutes per day on a normal average year.
So then we get to probably what most people want to know. The influences on our current tax levy. And last night I presented a workshop in front of the school board to go over what we knew yesterday. The state, the state certified our numbers this morning. I've actually been in meetings all morning, so I haven't had a chance to jump on DPI's site and see what our actual certified numbers are yet. I am anticipating a little bit of change from what we have because we just literally don't know and don't get any preliminary numbers at all on a couple of the numbers that will influence this. But this is what we knew as of yesterday. So our revenue limit overall increased by $2.8 million to $111 million. So from that, we have a state portion of that and a local portion. Fortunate for our taxpayers, our state aid increased by $4 million. A lot of that due to the fact that state aid is tied to your expenditures. So the more expenses you have when you're positively aided, and we are a district that is positively aided, the more expenditures you have, the more state aid you get. Again, that kind of goes back to the rationale from putting $2.5 million into Fund 46. We were able to capture $384,000 of additional aid. That all is factored into this. So we were able to reduce the amount of our local tax levy then because we were able to increase that state aid. So it minimized some of the increase that we were able to get within the $111 million from the per pupil increase there we were able to offset that by getting additional state aid. So our local limit, which is our Fund 10 and our Fund 38, is a little over 47 million, which is a reduction from 1920. Total tax levy went up a little bit from the prior year to just under 52 million, but our tax levy, the mill rate, actually decreased by roughly 30 cents. So we're looking to certify at the end of the month a overall tax rate, mill rate of 8.92, which is down from last year's 9.22. So I know we tried to cram a lot of information in a fairly short period of time, but that was the presentation we had prepared, so I guess we can go to the questions from the group.
Yeah, well, we got a couple of questions that came in, and I think we'll maybe ask a couple of those, and then Vickie, if I see Dave Gunlock joined us, maybe talk a bit at the end about the upcoming referendum, if that works for you. But question that came in as it relates to who makes the final decisions as to which learning model we're using. Is it the school district, the health department director? And the comment here, it seems to fluctuate, throughout communities. The comment here is Fond du Lac is still meeting. I know the private schools here in Oshkosh are still meeting in person. So can you give us a little insight on that?
Most certainly. So the district does put out every 2 weeks, we publish on our website a matrix in order for people to understand what data is taken into consideration as we're reviewing what instructional model that the district should be in. It is ultimately the district's decision. Knowing that it is the district's decision, we do make those decisions in consultation with the health department and data that is provided to us that is specific to the Oshkosh area school district boundaries, in addition to data that's specific to our school districts, such as the absenteeism rate or the substitute teacher fill rate, as well as what our community overall, so within Winnebago County, what is the data looking like related to these things. Other things that are taken into consideration are the number of individuals who are having to quarantine or isolate. We also have a dashboard for which we report that information in a public way as well. So all of the decisions are based upon data because, as we all know, COVID can be a very emotional aspect, and rather than getting into the emotions, we allow the data to guide our way and our way of thinking. One of the major differences also is between Fond du Lac and within Winnebago County and Oshkosh specifically, is we know that the positivity rate is drastically different between the communities. Unfortunately, as we all are aware of, we've made the New York Times, but not in the way that we want to make the New York Times. We continue over the past 3 weeks now to remain within the top 5 rankings, typically on a daily basis that's updated for the amount of spread that is the amount of positive spread over a 2-week period. And that's for the Oshkosh-Neenah community. So again, there's a lot of different data points that are taken into consideration. The district is the one who ultimately makes the decision. It is under the advisement and of the health department as to what are some of those activities that we can continue to be able to provide in person, as I mentioned earlier, with some of those subgroups, as well as even like our before school or after school strength training activities for some of our athletes. But we do that because, as I mentioned before, our goal is to provide as much in-person activity as possible and as much in-person instruction as possible within a safe environment where we can appropriately staff.
I know a lot of, I know parents want kids back in session. I know the school district wants kids back in session. The private schools, Lourdes and Oshkosh Christian, are still operating in person. They're in the same environment. What are they doing, and are there some lessons learned that we could be as we look at what they're doing to keep their schools functioning in person, I guess is there anything that we could learn from that? Is there anything we could do that may expedite our, going back into in-person and classroom sessions again?
That's a very good question, John. I can't speak towards the decisions that are being made by the private schools. I can only speak towards the decisions that are being made for the public school. And as I mentioned before, we have ongoing conversations with not only the Winnebago County Health Department, but also health departments across the Fox Valley region. We also listen carefully to the advisements that are being given to us. And so again, I'm not going to be able to address that question fully, except for just telling you how our decisions are being made. I don't know how they're making their decisions and what conversations they are having.
Okay. Question that came in is, individual heard that the census count shows a loss of 487 students. First of all, is that number right? And what does that student loss translate to? Is it about 10,000 a negative budget impact per student?
So some of this goes back to what Mr. Nehan was talking about. For this first year, the state is holding harmless as to enrollment adjustments that have occurred. However, our budget is always based on a 3-year rolling average. So while we have a pass for it for this year, there is potential for there to be an impact on the next 2 school years related to this year. I do know that there is a proposed legislation that is out there right now in order to look at and to address those concerns, because this is a statewide issue and concern that has occurred. I don't know what the certified numbers are, but the last update that I had was that we had a loss of 482, and 131 of those come from our 4K program. So these are probably parents who said, don't need to necessarily take the risk and just enroll them in kindergarten the following year. We had 111 that open enrolled out of our school district. And then we had approximately 240 that chose to homeschool. I would anticipate that of those individuals who chose to homeschool, I would anticipate that we'll probably get a lot of those students back. Those were families that had the ability to be able to provide a homeschool environment on a short-term basis, i.e. 1 year. But one just never knows until we get into next school year.
I do want to clarify something though, because I think based on the question, there's a little confusion. The census has nothing to do with how we fund and whether we lose money or not within our funding revenue formula. And the numbers that Vickie gave are good headcount numbers, but that's not what's used to create our revenue limit. Our revenue limit formula is completely different, and it's based on a 3-year rolling average. We lost 92 student FTEs on what would be considered our revenue limit formula, which is where we get the $920,000 of hold harmless from. That's the money that gets backed out. So it's not just hearing from a census that we're having a reduction of students, or that we have more students going out than we do within the open enrollment system. It really is based on a 3-year rolling average of each year. There's an FTE headcount we do off the 3rd Friday in September, and there's many variables that discussion itself could take us an hour to go through in depth on that. So it's just not as simple as saying, well, I heard you lost roughly 500 kids on the census. Does that equate to $5 million? No, not the way we're funded. I hope that helps.
Oh, sorry. When you do have a lower student count, however, what do we do to adjust staffing around that?
So we have been taking a look at that. For example, we had some vacancies that had not been filled at that point in time. So we went ahead, and it was mostly within our paraprofessional staffing. So we went ahead and rather than, we froze those positions early on. We did it towards, we made that decision during the summer. and then reevaluated and reallocated staff across the district in order where we had the ability to not fill positions, to go ahead and not fill those positions. As you also are aware of, just because you may be down, maybe in a particular school, you may be down 3 second graders, you can't not have a second grade classroom teacher. You have to have a second grade. And so those are some of the constraints that we have right now when it comes to our instructional staff. We do this across the entire district rather than building by building in order to ensure that we are stretching our FTEs to the maximum possible. We've been doing this for years. That's one of the reasons why we've been fortunate, though we're a low spending district, that we've been able to continue to offer that, combined with the operational referendum that has been approved in the past by our community, that we've been able to continue to provide appropriate programming for our students. So where we have some of the staffing levels where we can adjust is definitely with our paraprofessional staff. And those are the techniques that we have been utilizing thus far in order to be more conscientious related to staffing, and also one of the techniques that we're using in order to save money. Mr. Nehans, did you want to also talk about how we even refinanced some of our debt here recently in order to, again, continue to try to look to save money, and which ultimately goes back to our taxpayers?
Correct. So in July, August, one of those time periods, we refinanced our debt, and not all of it was callable at the time. We'll have another opportunity in 2023 or 2022 to have another opportunity to refinance some callable debt. But we were able to save, between the debt we have in Fund 38 and Fund 39, we're able to save about $150,000 a year for moving forward from refinancing. We ended up refinancing at just under 1%. So we're always looking at those opportunities. Now we have some limitations on when your debt is callable and when you have that opportunity to do that, at least on a cost-effective manner. I mean, you can always defease debt, but if you do a defeasement outside of callable, you're going to incur expenses of somewhere between $16,000 and $25,000 to have all that, the legal aspect of that taking place. Another thing to kind of go off of that on one of the questions is, what is the district doing to save money? From the business office, we've shifted part of our benefit plan right now. We're going self-insured with our dental plan. So we're going to potentially save some money there, which is some good money on an annual basis rather than giving profit away. We're going to internalize that. We're looking at some other avenues to enhance some of what we're doing to potentially not only enhance our benefits, but make it more cost productive. Some things that I've done in the past in prior experiences that I think we can really capture here, if that's a direction the school board decides to go. So we are always constantly looking at within our departments here at Central Administration and understanding that there is a need. Obviously, we have limited resources, so we've got a need to make sure we're running as efficiently as we can. But along that lines, one of the things that's really putting a damper on our potential savings from the budgeting and the finance sense is we have too many buildings. We have 20 buildings and some of them are very small, so we can't be efficient within our staffing, and it's a lot of buildings to maintain and have problems with, especially when you have the age overall of the number of buildings we have. We're just creating a larger and larger liability for us from what the potential sudden emergencies that come up are going to stress within our budget, that it's just not a very effective and efficient way to run a business, and we are a business. So that would be some of the things that and again, that question's on the for the voters, but that is one of the first steps of the 4 phases that the plan is created to really right-size the district that way. And that would go a long way in having us become truly a more efficient run business and truly see some savings.
Well, virtual learning certainly seems to have piqued a lot of people's interest. So a question, actually 2 questions. You know, what are you hearing from parents as it relates to their kids' learning experience through this remote learning? And the question I always had is, you know, first of all, I don't know how you do it, but you know, but so how do you deliver Phi-Ed art and music curriculum virtually?
And I'm going to ask Dr. Gunlock to jump in on that one just a little bit. I'll go ahead and get us kicked off on that, though. So when what we do on a lot of those is that we have a lot of recordings. A couple things. I'll tear your question apart just a little bit, John, and segment it out. One of the things that we are definitely providing instruction in a much different way than what we did this past spring, because as we all know, this past spring happened and it happened rapidly. And so we did a lot of work since that time over the summer, doing a lot of professional development, and we changed up how we're providing instruction in a virtual environment at this point. We were able to expand all the way down to kindergarten, our E-Academy program, so that's 100% fully virtual option for our parents. It was a tad bit bumpy getting started on that because, again, we had initially planned within our strategic plan to be going down to middle school this year with E-Academy, but not going all the way down to elementary school. We've worked with our parents side by side on that, and I'm happy to say at this point in time, we are feeling a lot, given the feedback that we received from our families, and the collaboration that we've had with them, that things are moving much smoother within our E-Academy program, and we have a lot more satisfied individuals within that environment. For our current school environment, where we are right now, whereas over the spring, our goal was more to maintain education in order to keep things going. Now we have a different goal. Our goal is to continue going forward with education as though you were in school. One of the things that we learned from this past spring was that asynchronous learning, in other words, students logging on whenever they wanted to log on and look and to complete assignments, for a majority of our students needed structure. And so as a result of that, we now have what is known as synchronous and asynchronous learning. So families can log on at a certain time and join the classroom group or the class period in order to further their education. They get assignments that asynchronous, where they still have to complete, just like we did in a traditional school environment where you get homework and you have to prepare for class coming up. We want to remind our families that this is our 3rd week of this, so we're still early in the process. We're still working out some of those areas where we know, all right, let's gauge the amount of work that we're assigning. Is it working? Is it too much? Is it too little? In the class format, are we being consistent from teacher to teacher for our secondary schools, middle school and high school? So that families and students know where to go in order to access their assignments or to access the video. Let's say they were not able to attend in person, but now they're able to maybe see the recording of it at night in order to provide the most flexibility as possible to our families. Dr. Gunlock, he was asking the question related to Phi-Ed, music, art. How are we doing that? And you're on mute.
Sorry about that. The Phi-Ed one is the one we get asked about a lot, and actually, surprisingly, that's one of the easier ones. You know, there was a parent who was saying, you know, they went outside and their student had their Chromebook in front of them and they were planking, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And that student was in Phi-Ed class, and they were participating with others. And even before any of this happened, we had a significant number of people who were taking Phi-Ed as an online course. and getting, going through that elective. So that works out pretty well. The big thing we've been focusing on is instructional design. And the good news for Oshkosh is that we were focusing on this a year and a half ago. This was before COVID, before we went virtual. We were testing a full virtual environment, and we realized that when you go to a virtual setting, it isn't just about the content. I think, John, one of the issues that parents are having is they remember what school was like. We all remember what school was like, and they're thinking that it should look just like that with the Chromebook, and it doesn't. You can't sit in front of that screen for 7-8 hours in one shot. So what we've tried to do is create, as Dr. Cartwright said, these times where everybody's online at the same time, kind of like we are right now. And then how do you break them off into groups to do some of the actual work, create the new learning, and then bring that back. So you're always engaging, disengaging, and re-engaging. So the focal point has been on how do we use instructional design properly, and we've had to change that. Because I could have the greatest, I was a chemistry teacher. I could have the most amazing chemistry lesson ready to go. But if I put it in our learning management system in a way that is confusing to you as the learner or your parents who may be assisting you, it falls flat. So quality control and instructional design are two of the biggest things that we're focusing on right now. We have a course that was created by our tech integrators called Canvas 2.0. Canvas is our learning management system. And the whole focal point of that course that all of our teachers take is how do you create an instructional lesson where your students are on a Chromebook, maybe they have spotty internet, maybe they have great internet, maybe they are well versed in using the technology, maybe they aren't. How do you engage those kids, create learning activities that provide enough variation to compensate for those changes? And as Dr. Cartwright said, we're about 3 weeks in on this. Our teachers have made some pretty good progress, but also we realize we're not just teaching the students. We're teaching 17,000 parents. And a lot of what we have to teach the parents is how to take a break, the fact that they don't have to be sitting there staring at the screen the entire time, that there's timing to this. Give yourself some ability to relax a moment, because some of them are taking this super seriously as well, and that's causing stress amongst the learner. And as our teachers have had those conversations with them, they're creating a new normal. And the good news is, as much as we all dislike COVID, when we come out of this, we will be a stronger school system. We went from 7 students in our E-Academy to over 1,000 in one shot. So we had to stand that up really fast. And I'm very proud of our teachers who've done that, because this was all new to them too. And they're trying to create an education that mirrors what the students are going to do in the future, but also so that they don't miss a step. And that's going to be a challenge this year. Tied to the referendum, somebody said, well, you're doing all this stuff virtual, and we're talking about facilities. How does that jive? This will be over. We will be opened up again, and everybody's going to be back at some point. And at that point, we're going to need our schools like never before. And we're going to need flexible spaces, because learning will have changed irrevocably for the good. So, right now we don't have facilities that match that. Hopefully we will in the future.
Well, I know we have actually a lot of other questions I don't think we have time for, but can we just take the last couple of minutes and real briefly just do a quick overview of the referendum that's coming up here on the ballot on November 3rd?
Sure, we can do that. There's 2 questions. We'll make it quick because most of you have already seen it, but there's 2 questions. There's one operational question that takes the operational referendum from 2014 and 16, wraps it up into one thing, replaces both of them, and runs out till 2030. And that will continue the expenditures. It prevents us from having to cut $7.95 million out of the budget. But it also supports the technology initiative that came into being, did not exist before 2014. That came into being. So that's part of it as well. The good news about that one is it does not have any increase on the taxes, because it's continuing to do what we've been doing. Most people who've been in Oshkosh a while understand that one because we've talked about that before. The other one is a little more complex. That's the $107 million. That's question 2. The focal point of that one is there's 4 pieces. There's some safety and security improvements, which basically creates secured office areas. The second one is some high level infrastructure needs that our current budget just we can't deal with. They're too big, but they're important. But the majority of it is a new middle school and a new elementary school on the northeast side. That would take us from 5 schools that are on 3 sites, 3 physical buildings, but there's 5 schools inside of that, down to 2 schools on 2 sites. And that is the first step of a consolidation plan that'll take us from 20 facilities down to 14. It'll create slightly larger facilities that'll make it much more efficient for us to staff, but it will also create facilities that will accelerate learning versus inhibit learning. Right now, I'm sorry, a lot of our facilities are old. They were designed when we all sat in desks and rows, and that's how we learned, and that's how life was. Well, life's not that way anymore. So a lot of our facilities tend to inhibit learning. The newer facilities like Oaklawn, as an example, tend to accelerate learning. They're flexible. The rooms can change to meet the needs, and they're future-proof. So that's the elevator pitch for the referendum. It was a long elevator ride.
Well, Dr. Gunlock, I think one thing that's also extremely important for our viewers to understand is by addressing these 5 facilities, we're taking $23 million of deferred maintenance off of our books right off the top. That's almost a quarter of what we're asking for from our voters to address 4 different things. Well, I should say 3 different things, right? Because one of them is truly 2 new facilities. But also the safety and security and infrastructure. And this is $23 million, everybody, that we do not have in our budget right now, just to make sure that we're crystal clear on that too. So one way or the other, we're going to have a facilities problem coming to us fairly quickly. In addition to that, the $23 million does not talk about renovating schools. It does not address classroom needs. It does not address services that we can provide for our students. It does not address the windshield time and the mileage that our taxpayers are having to pay because staff is having to drive from school to school to school. That $23 million is addressing roofs, HVAC systems, tuck pointing, and sidewalks and doors in some instances. But that is what it's addressing. It is not addressing anything else. So it is putting money into a facility that is already well over 100 years old. And that's our Merrill site that we're talking about. And so the community has the choice, of course, but it's how do we utilize our funds in the most sensible way that is long-term effect and long-term impact. And rather than something that may be, for the most part, to be able to band-aid a facility just to get us through and until sometime in the future. So those are things just to take into consideration when you're making your choices. And also right now, a lot of times people ask that question, why now? The market is the interest rate right now is at an all-time low. And to be able to take advantage of that and be able to save money on these project costs also plays into ensuring that you are utilizing your funds appropriately and being as cost effective as possible.
Well, great. We're a little beyond our 11 o'clock time limit. So again, we appreciate your participating in this. Vickie, thank you, Drew and Dave for joining us. Very, very insightful. You know, November 3rd is right around the corner. So, you know, vote early and, you know, vote often, right? No, I'm only kidding. So again, thank you. We have recorded this session. It'll be on our website. So if you want to come back and view this, and we'll be sharing it with others. So again, on behalf of the chamber, thank you for joining us. And next Thursday, we have our first of 2 campaign forums. We're doing with candidates at 8 o'clock on the 22nd. we will be having a forum with Assembly Representative Hentz and his challenger, Donnie Herman. It'll be broadcast live on WOSH, so hopefully you can join us then. Thank you all.